Hello, my friends. This is LifeSpring Talk Part 2. I'm going to the article. It's on Wikipedia, so anybody can look that up. I'm not going to really go over again the website where the guy calls it a cult. There's really not that much in it, not that much to really um, talk about. But LifeSpring was, as I say, a for-profit human potential organization or training founded in 1974 by a man named John Hanley. And there were some others, Robert White, Randy Revelle, and Charlene Aframo, if I pronounced that correct. And they talk right off the bat, they encountered significant controversy in the 70s and 80s with various academic articles characterizing their training methods as deceptive and indirect techniques of persuasion and control, and allegations that LifeSpring was a cult that used coercive methods to prevent members from leaving. Now, this was also highlighted in a 1987 article in the Washington Post, and as well as local television reporting, where they had been significant, mostly in larger cities. I did my training in Phoenix, re-audited around 1983, I believe it was, in Denver, Colorado, where I reside now. Now, let me just back up here and say, deceptive and indirect techniques of persuasion and control. I didn't experience that at all. There was no deception whatsoever. I thought everyone in the organization was, and the supporting volunteer people, training coordinators, were upfront, honest, had a lot of integrity, very direct in what the exercises and processes we were doing in these trainings were about. I just find that totally misleading, that it was deceptive and indirect techniques of persuasion and control. There was no control going on. The biggest control they might be talking about were the ground rules. And every training or game or exercise, as they talk about in the beginning, has rules, ground rules. You play a card game, you play Monopoly, you play charades. There are ground rules. You go out and play the game of life, get a job, get involved in government. There are rules. There are laws. There are traffic rules. These are laws. Okay? If we didn't have rules and regulations and laws, we would have chaos. We would have anarchy, right? I don't think any of you out there are going to disagree with me on that. So LifeSpring did have rules. Some of the rules were that you will be on time, be in your seat on time when the training begins, and I was for every training. Close call on one. I just got in my seat as the music ended, but they played the 2001 Space Odyssey music, and when that last note ended, you needed to be in the classroom. If you were not in there, the doors would be shut. They weren't locked and bolted. They were just shut, and the trainer would be out there to confront you and say, why were you late? And it wasn't like you were grilled and beaten up or anything, but you would be confronted as to, is this something that goes on in your life a lot, that you're not on time? And there would be a discussion probably just to get the person to see that, yeah, I make these agreements, which we all agreed in the beginning of the training, we would be on time. And of course, many people would be late. And so I thought it was good. It was good to look at, how do we run our lives? Do we say we're going to do something and then don't do it? So that's partly what the training operated on, was the principle, if you break the ground rules, you would be confronted. But no one was denied to go to the bathroom. One night I had to leave and go to the bathroom. I had a urinary infection. I was drinking extra fluids, cranberry juice. I had to leave and go to the bathroom. Nobody stopped me. They said, I gave them my reason why I had to go. They said, you can go. Okay? So I was not being tortured. One of the ground rules was you would not wear a watch or timepiece during the training. They did not want people sitting there fidgeting, looking at their watches, knowing what time it was. I thought that was a fair ground rule. Another one was you would not use psychoactive drugs or even caffeine for those 5 days. That was a tough one for me, but I did. And I'm glad I did. I kept my agreements as far as the training, because a big part of the training is, how do you live your life keeping agreements? Does it work for you to make agreements and then break them all the time? And just ask yourself, how often do you do that? How often does anybody do it? We're human beings. I think we make open, verbal, or written agreements, or even implied agreements with others, and most often even with ourselves. Saying to ourselves, we're going to do something, and then breaking our own word with ourselves. No, I'm not going to do that. Is that a bad thing? Not necessarily. Can it be a bad thing? Potentially it can. It can erode your self-esteem and self-worth and self-value by the fact that your word doesn't mean anything. You know, Don Miguel Ruiz, a great spiritual teacher I revere and admire, That's one of the four agreements in his book, The Four Agreements, is my word is impeccable. When I give my word, it means something. I don't just indiscriminately say, oh, I'll do this and then blow it off. Break your agreements. So I have a lot of issues with this statement, deceptive and indirect techniques of persuasion and control. I wasn't persuaded or controlled in any way during my 5 days of the basic training, nor my 5 days of the IPE interpersonal experience training, nor during my training coordinator experience. I had nothing but wonderful experiences across the board in all the trainings. Lovely bunch of people with high integrity that kept their word. I came out of all the trainings feeling like a better human being, looking at myself, examining myself in ways I really had never done before, honestly, and got a lot of feedback. That was a big part of LifeSpring, was getting feedback, not only from the trainers, but from your fellow participants. People giving you open and honest feedback. Doesn't mean they were necessarily 100% right. And the key thing during the feedback sessions was not to take anything personal. Just listen to it openly. Decide for yourself, does this ring true? Does this sound legitimate? That maybe what they're telling me, they're seeing something in me I don't see myself? I mean, I think personally getting feedback from whoever, your family, friends, or even strangers sometimes, can be so valuable. And it's so rare that people will be, open and honest with you, maybe even blunt, to tell you how things really are, how you really look and sound and you're acting. A lot of people will just turn the other way and, whisper behind your back, but won't tell you to your face the fact that they see you doing something they find inappropriate or makes them uncomfortable. And I like the fact that LifeSpring was basically just solid across the board. They kept their word on everything they said they would do, and I had no issues with them whatsoever. I never got angry at LifeSpring trainers or the training coordinators. Never had a reason to. I loved the fact that everything operated according to the plan they said it would. They made statements in the beginning of how this is going to go, and they kept their word. And there wasn't anything I disagreed with. I mean, there were some people who complained, well, how come we can't have a watch? How come we can't go to the bathroom? Well, there will be bathroom breaks. But, going to the bathroom for a lot of people can be an avoidance. How often do people get up and say, I got to go to the bathroom just to avoid things? I mean, I'd say 90% of the time or more, probably 99% of the time when you say you got to go, you got to go. But occasionally, people definitely use that as an avoidance, as we do many, many things to bail out on situations we're uncomfortable with. Oh, I got to eat. I'm hungry. Well, there were breaks allowed where you could go get a little bit of food or, food that you might have, a snack, but you couldn't eat during the training. There were rules that said this is how it's going to go. And I thought they were appropriate. Nobody was kept in there for hours and hours on end without being able to get something to drink or eat or go to the bathroom. It was reasonable rules, I thought, not necessarily the rules I would have operated with if I was just going about my day-to-day life. But the fact that I had paid money to go and do this training, to learn something, to improve myself, I was willing to obey and agreed to the rules, and the fact that I agreed to them meant I was going to keep my word. It was important to me to keep my word. So I didn't see anything involving techniques of persuasion and control. In fact, not almost, every one of the training talks was on a topic that was open for questions. So if the talk was on agreements, on commitment, there would be a talk, 15 minutes or so, some examples, some stories to illustrate the point, and then there would be questions. You were allowed to ask questions. And once the questions were done, we would get into the participatory exercises or processes. After that, there would be sharing, and people would be allowed to share and also ask more questions if they wanted to. So it was an open forum. You could ask any question you wanted. People confronted the trainers many times, got up and argued with them. Well, I don't agree with you, blah, blah, blah. Believe me, these trainers had heard it all. They were good. And they had a response for every person. And most of the time, what the people were presenting were all kinds of just stories, personal stories, whining, excuses, complaining. Well, I don't like this. Well, I don't understand why I have to do this. And the trainers would point out, you agreed to this rule. And is this how you operate in your life? And they would turn it back on the person many times just to get the person to understand and realize Is this how your life works? And is it working for you? I heard that so many times. Does this work in your life to operate this way? And believe me, by the end of it, almost everybody had to recognize and agree, no, it doesn't work for me to lie or cheat or break my word or, bail out on people I've made commitments to and not have integrity. So that's a lot what LifeSpring for me was about, was building up personal self-esteem, self-worth, and your own integrity, and valuing ourselves for the wonderful human beings that we are and capable of being, and also letting go of a lot of our guilt and shame and operating out of methods that don't really enhance our lives and make us better people, staying stuck in hating ourselves and beating ourselves up behind our own back, kind of secretly sabotaging ourselves while we openly say, oh, I want love, I want people to like me, but we're really not going about it in the best way. So that concludes part 2, and part 3 coming up next.